Chapter 11 of Wise and Otherwise. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Wise and Otherwise by Pansy. Chapter 11. See then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Mr. Tresevant was in fancy dressing-gown and flowered slippers, leaning back in his easy-chair, looking, his wife thought, the picture of provoking indifference. She was in her curled-up attitude on the couch, both feet under her, her front hair in its after-dinner crimping-pins, collar and jewelry laid aside, and a general air of readiness for her after-dinner nap about her. There were, however, 2 pink spots on her cheeks and a determined glitter in her eyes that augured ill for her nap, unless she could undergo some calming-down process. "The rooms are perfectly elegant," she continued, after a moment's silence. "Large and well ventilated, and most charmingly furnished." "Any better furnished than these?" Mr. Tresevant asked, glancing his eyes down the length of the room, and letting it rest gratefully on one and another object of taste and beauty. "Oh, differently furnished. There are not so many fancy articles, of course. They never furnish such things in hotels, and I'm sure I don't want them. I have enough fancy articles of my own. But the furniture is much handsomer, heavy and dark." "And dismal," interrupted her husband. "I have an idea of just how it looks. I don't admire such furniture. I like these rooms better than any I ever had. How came you to be wandering over hotel rooms? You have no acquaintances there, have you?" "Mrs. Boyd is boarding there, and I have met her several times." "But you have no calling acquaintance with her? She has never called on you, has she?" "No, and I didn't call on her," this in an impatient tone, accompanied by an impatient rearrangement of the pillows. "I just stepped in there this morning to look at the rooms. Mrs. Boyd told me yesterday that they were vacant, and I wanted to see them." "Then I hope you will excuse me for telling you that I think you did a very foolish thing, and one that will give rise to unnecessary talk, for I haven't the slightest intention of going to a hotel to board." "I must say, Mr. Tresevant, that I think in so simple a matter as a boarding place I might be allowed to have a voice," and the ever ready tears showed signs of springing up in Mrs. Tresevant's eyes. Her husband drew in his feet, sat erect, and spoke seriously. "My dear Laura, you know I always consult your preferences whenever it is possible, but in this case I think you are being unreasonable. There is no earthly reason why we should change our boarding place. We have delightful rooms, and every comfort and luxury that could be imagined, and our host and hostess are constant and unfailing in their attention to our comfort. Now, what more could you ask?" "A great deal," and the tears drew back, leaving a flash in her eyes. "I would rather live in an attic, on bread and water, than to board here. I don't like Mrs. Sayles. She is a smooth-faced, deceitful hypocrite. I never could endure people who were so painfully perfect. I don't like your pattern of propriety, Miss Bronson, any better. And I just feel all the time as if I were a prisoner, and they were spies on me, and they are, too." "I think all this is utterly absurd and unreasonable," Mr. Tresevant answered in that exasperating tone of calm superiority which gentlemen understand so well how to assume. "Mrs. Sayles seems to me a meek, inoffensive, well-meaning little woman, and there are few young ladies like Miss Dell Bronson." "I should hope so, an insufferable prig, if ever there was one. It is a great pity you did not select her for a wife, since you have such an unbounded admiration for her." Mr. Tresevant bent forward suddenly, and picked an invisible shred from the carpet. When he spoke again, his voice was somewhat constrained. "I would have some regard for common sense in my remarks, if I were you." "Well," said Mrs. Tresevant, "I am not happy here. I am miserable. If you are contented and happy, I suppose that is all that is necessary. But I wish I were at home with my mother. I wish I had never left her," and then the waiting tears burst forth in a perfect torrent. Mr. Tresevant looked distressed. He was by nature a gentle, tender-hearted man. He was almost afraid of tears. He had sometimes real qualms of conscience over his unkindness in lifting this spoiled and petted child of fortune out of the downy nest of home and bring her into such a different atmosphere, subject to cares and responsibilities which she was about as well qualified to assume as a bird would have been. And yet the nest to which he brought her was surely not lacking in down. And again he looked up and down the well-appointed room. It was certainly as elegant a spot as any to which she could have been accustomed. But meantime Mrs. Tresevant's sobs were becoming more emphatic, and something must be done. "Laura," he said at last, in tones full of distress, "I do hope you will not make yourself ill. I am sure there is nothing within my power that I am not ready to do for your comfort and happiness; but, really, this thing is not feasible. When there is no earthly necessity for doing so, I must say that I cannot conscientiously go to a hotel to board." "I should like to know why?" came to him in muffled tones from the depths of the pillows. "Because it is, in a sense, countenancing the indiscriminate sale of intoxicating liquors, of which neither you nor I approve." Mrs. Tresevant stayed her tears, and sat up to answer him. "I should really like to know what sense there is in that? You don't have to board in the bar room, nor buy liquor, nor drink it." "No, but you say by your presence there that you think the business is perfectly legitimate, and you have no objection to it." "Carroll, I think that is utter nonsense. Why do you say such a thing? You don't patronize his liquors, only his boarding house. Such fanaticism as that is equal to Miss Bronson herself. No wonder she hates hotels. All her knowledge of them is derived from that little low hole of a tavern where she lived. You stop at first class hotels when you are traveling. Why do you, if it is wicked to patronize them?" "That is different," said Mr. Tresevant, who really was not thoroughly posted on this subject, and did not detect all the sophistry of his wife's reasoning. "When I am traveling there is nothing else that can be done. I am obliged to patronize hotels. But here we are all settled, and perfectly comfortable." "I am not comfortable," came in the sepulchral voice. His wife had gone down into the pillows again. "I am not comfortable, I am miserable. I wish I had never left my own home. I hate this place. I don't care," and the close of the sentence was lost in sobs. Mr. Tresevant sprang up suddenly. His irritable flesh and blood were not in condition to endure more just then. From the distant parlor there issued strains of wonderful, tender music. The piano was being guided by a singularly skillful hand, whose touch he knew. The minister felt the need of something soothing, and thither he went. Dell and Mrs. Dr. Douglass were the occupants of the room. He went over to the piano, and tried to get calmed down with the influence of the weird, gentle melody. "Now it does seem to me that there are times when it is almost a pity that people can not be gifted with clairvoyance, or whatever name you might call the power to know of certain things that have just been transpiring in a place where you are not. For instance, could Mrs. Douglass in some mysterious manner have been made aware of the scene in which her pastor had just escaped, could she have known of the really earnest effort that he had made to be patient and argumentative, it is not probable that she would have chosen this particular time to say what she did the moment Dell's fingers strayed from the keys. "Mr. Tresevant, I heard some astonishing news about you this morning." "Ah," Mr. Tresevant said, trying to smile and look what he did not feel, viz., social and comfortable. "News is very plentiful and very cheap, I have observed. Am I to be informed of the nature of this last manufacture?" "Oh, yes, indeed, for I am in haste to hear you deny it. I heard that you were going to the Park Street Hotel to board." The shadow of a smile left Mr. Tresevant's face, and his brow clouded over. "I am sorry to disappoint you," he said, haughtily, "but I have no special denial to make." "Why, is it really true?" "Not that I know of, but I certainly shall not trouble myself to deny all the statements that people may choose to make. I should probably be full of business if I pursued that course." Mrs. Douglass laughed. "I begin to breathe freely," she said, merrily. "You frightened me. I thought you really had some idea of it." "Would such an event be so very alarming, Mrs. Douglass?" "Indeed it would. The idea of a minister of the gospel being obliged to board where they sold rum would be too much of a mixture in these days of advanced ideas on that subject." "People do not all think alike on that subject, however, even though ideas have advanced," said the minister, feeling in a particularly belligerent state of mind, and somewhat indifferent as to which side he fought. "No, I know they don't," answered Mrs. Douglass. "More's the pity, as Grandma Porter says. But clergymen, as a class, are on the right side of the question nowadays, are they not?" "That depends on what you consider the right side," Mr. Tresevant answered, promptly, remembering his old talks with Dell Bronson, and believing that he had a character for consistency to maintain. "If you mean that the clergy, as a class, deplore drunkenness as a great moral evil, and hope and pray that it may be swept from the land, then I think they all will be found on that side. But if you mean that sort of advocacy of temperance that proposes to march up to a man who has a right to quite as much liberty of action as I have, and say to him, 'Here, sir, you shan't drink another drop of liquor as long as you live,' or that, when it comes in contact with men who get their living by the liquor traffic, puts on a sort of 'I am holier than thou' expression, and passes by on the other side, then I confess to you that some of us have too vivid a sense of the meaning of the word liberty, and too humiliating a sense of our own shortcomings, to assume either of these styles." Mrs. Douglass looked somewhat puzzled, and answered, half laughingly, half in earnest, "I am not sure that I fully comprehend your position, only I don't see why I should associate with the man who murders my neighbor, through rum, any more than I would if he murdered him with powder; and why should a man have liberty to kill himself with liquor, and not liberty to do it with laudanum? Those nice distinctions are really very puzzling to me." Whereupon she announced her intention of hunting up Abbie, gathered her gloves and wrap about her, and took her departure. Dell still remained at the piano, touching the keys very softly occasionally, and Mr. Tresevant paced the floor in a state of vexation difficult to describe. Everybody seemed bent on running athwart him that afternoon, and, having arrived at that interesting stage where he felt an irresistible desire to continue the irritating process with somebody, he presently halted near Dell, speaking almost sharply: "I suppose you are fully in sympathy with Mrs. Douglass's extreme views?" Dell turned half round on the piano stool, and answered promptly: "I have not found occasion to change my opinions on that subject with the lapse of time." "With the removal of the immediate cause of your bitterness of feeling in regard to the subject, I had hoped that your feelings had modified and taken on the garb of charity." This seemed to Dell such a harsh and unwarrantable allusion to her heavy and sorrowful past, that it brought the flash to her eyes which he very well remembered. However, she answered him calmly enough: "There was no immediate cause, Mr. Tresevant, and principles do not change. My father's manner of life and his home were great and bitter trials to me, but were not by any means the foundation of my principles." "Just let me ask you," said Mr. Tresevant, veering suddenly from his subject, "do you really consider it inconsistent with the principles of a temperance man to board at a hotel?" "Yes, sir, I do. That is, if you mean a hotel where they keep a bar, and deal out poison by the glass or pint." "Why is it?" he asked, impatiently, producing his wife's argument. "He is not obliged to patronize the bar, nor to advocate liquor drinking." "Yet he does both indirectly. He gives countenance to the house by his presence, plainly stating that he considers it a proper place, and the business in which it engages legitimate and respectable." "I don't accept that view of the subject." "Suppose you try it," Dell said, coolly. "Take up your abode in some liquor-selling hotel, and then preach a sermon to your young men, entreating them to keep away from such places, urge them to consider it a disgrace to be seen coming out of the left-hand door which leads to the bar, while you 10 times a day come from the right-hand door, close beside it. People are very apt to confuse doors under such circumstances." "I should not preach any such sermon," said Mr. Tresevant, taking up his line of march across the room again. "I preach the gospel." Dell laughed, it must be confessed, a little scornfully. Mr. Tresevant was so manifestly in ill humor, he was so thoroughly acting the character of a cross boy, instead of a Christian minister, his last sentence had sounded so very puerile, so utterly senseless in the light of the present day, that she could not help the touch of scorn. He did not seem to notice it, however, but continued rapidly: "Pray, Miss Bronson, what do you extreme people do when you are traveling? You are obliged to enter the unclean places then." "I know it," said Dell, frankly, "and I consider it a very puzzling question. I don't know what will be done until the temperance movement has taken another stride onward, and given Christian people hotels where they can stop without violating their Christian principles. I know that one man does now. When my uncle travels, he inquires in all directions for temperance houses, and if he finds one, no matter how poor or forlorn, or how ill kept it is, he braves the discomforts rather than swell the profits of a rumseller." "Which is a very quixotic idea, in my opinion. It will take some time to reform the world by that process, I fancy. Miss Bronson, I don't believe you can ever save men by professing to be so much better than they are." "And I don't believe you can ever save drunkards by making rum selling respectable. However, if I believed that people boarded at hotels for the purpose of saving men, I should certainly honor their motives more than I now do, if I couldn't honor their judgment." "That is just the point. You extremists never give people credit for right motives, unless they work in the exact line that you have marked out." "Mr. Tresevant, do you believe that Christian men go to liquor selling hotels to board, because they think they can by that means lessen the mischief that is done by the sale of liquor?" "That is a question which I consider every man has a right to settle with his own conscience." Dell turned impatiently to the piano again. What sense was there in trying to argue with a man who jumped a point as fast as he reached it? One thing she said, however, that she would have left unsaid if she had known Mr. Tresevant as well as one would think she might have done by this time. "I can tell you one thing about many of your people. They would be deeply pained if you should countenance a liquor selling hotel. There is a very strong temperance element among them, Mr. Sayles says, and they desire as a church to take very high ground on this question." "My people must learn that they have not a machine nor a puppet for a pastor. It is a clergyman's place to lead his people, not be led by them, and the sooner this people understand it, the more comfortable it will be for both parties." And then Mr. Tresevant was deluged by a perfect storm of music from the indignant piano, in the midst of which he escaped. CHAPTER XII.